Hello everyone, Jared here, and in today's video, we're traveling through Xiangyang to what is possibly our favorite part of our trip around China, the Xiangyang Movie Park. And in order to get there, we have to cross the river and head south all the way to the other side of the city, where the movie park is located. One interesting thing about the drive down there was seeing all the old buildings being torn down, as well as the contrast between that and all the buildings going up around the movie park as we were approaching. There was also this weird head in the background on the hillside that we weren't sure what it was for. So, after about a half-hour's drive, we finally arrived. Here we are at the entrance to the Tong movie village. This is where they do some films, or they did films in the past. And when I saw this online as a potential place where we could visit, I thought we had to go. One of the things I enjoyed most about going to Kyoto in the past is that we went to where they made the old different samurai flicks, and that was a great theater area to just go around and explore inside that park. And this time we're going to be able to see what they do in a Chinese version of that. And after a quick selfie, we went inside to go get tickets, which were about $15 a person each. But it was absolutely worth it for what we were going to see this day. So, after we got our tickets, we went out and approached the gate again to head on inside the movie park. And immediately, one of the strangest things that we noticed was that there was absolutely no one here, pretty much. Aside from just a few groups of people, it seemed like we had pretty much this entire place to ourselves. And we couldn't figure out why, for such a magnificent sight, there would be absolutely no one here. Particularly when we saw what's inside next. This is just once you pass through the entrance to the park. We can only imagine how much better it's going to get as we go through this place. Who needs the Forbidden City when you can have this to yourself? This really was as grand as it gets, and I couldn't believe our luck with what we were seeing here. But aside from this hallway, there was plenty more still to see. Sounds like we have something going on up ahead. Let's check it out. So, as we approached this side section and saw a lot more fantastic looking buildings, we noticed there was this large crowd around some kind of performance. And upon closer inspection, we noticed that it was some kind of monkey show. I don't get what this has to do with China or the movies, but maybe that's just me because I haven't seen enough of them yet. Moving on from there, we approached this wonderful bridge, and really you can tell this place is a movie park because every bit of architecture is worth taking a video of. And because I had no idea what to expect, I decided to climb on up to the top so I could get a look at this fantastic view of the park. Just look at that palace in the distance. I really wanted to get over there right now, but we were going to head off over to the right first instead, and save the palace for last if we could. So after taking a look for a little longer, I decided it was finally time to head on down. Gotta be careful walking down these steps. Rather steep, but it's a great view. And after meeting up again with my father, we looked a little bit more around this area before moving on. So, we decided to walk on over to the right side of the park, passing over a lot of bridges and a very long pathway to end up at this temple, full of Buddha statues that you would find in lots of temples all over China, and prayer flags that are hanging off of trees, as well as this, the main temple complex, which was really unlike anything I'd ever seen in a temple so far in China. And now, you get to see a little bit of what that looks like too, with all of these deity statues inside. Having had our fill of looking inside the temple, we decided to climb on up these steps you see here, up onto the building nearby, because I wanted to see what new sights there were to see once I got up top. And I'd occasionally stop for even more shots because every bit of architecture really was worth seeing. Looking out over the side, there was this temple complex, followed by a pagoda, and last but not least, the gateway where we walked in, as well as the bridge that we crossed over on our way here.
it was really breathtaking, and I probably could have just stayed up here for a long time if it wasn't so hot. Don't let the smog fool you, it was over 90 degrees outside.
Well, I can tell you so far I've had absolutely no regrets in choosing to come here today. This is better than what you could get in 99% of China. Less crowded, much more beautiful.
And so, after standing up there for a little bit longer, taking in the sight as much as I could, we eventually headed back down and off towards our next destination, which was a temple complex in the artificial mountains, which they carved all of these Buddhist statues out of in the walls, very reminiscent of the Longmen grottos in the Luoyang, which we saw early on in our trip. I elected to walk all the way up, climbing up all of these steps in the Buddha statue area, as well as the steps leading up to the temple complex, before taking a look back at where I'd been. It was a lot of climbing, but it was definitely worth it to be able to see something like this. Just looking out at this area really felt reminiscent of my time spent in Kyoto, seeing the Kiyomizu-dera temple, where there's a lot of similar architecture, which seemed a little out of place. But then again, Japan's culture was influenced a lot by ancient Chinese as well. Looking down from the edge, I was able to see my father way down in the distance, and I waved at him to get his attention, which he apparently saw, and I actually had no idea that he'd show up right there. So after that, we both parted ways yet again, and so I elected to walk on down the side of this temple, around the corner, while my father went somewhere else.
This movie set is very, very impressive. Nothing has compared to it so far. Definitely not on this trip.
Each of us was looking for a way to get over this wall to try to get into the palace area. But just like Nanjing for my father, he had issues trying to find a way up onto the wall. In the meantime, I went on the side of the temple like I said, climbing up just a few more steps through this cave-like section before being greeted with this sight.
Wow. Why does it have to be just a movie set?
And unfortunately, just like my father, I wasn't able to find my way over there. And coincidentally, we met up with one another at the top of these steps.
So, you had a fun climb?
It was my climb in Nanjing to the wall that never quite got up on the wall but went higher than the wall. That was my background.
Well, you made it up to the top point. Though there's nothing up here.
I'm 60 going on 160.
Well, after a short rest, we headed back on down, past the temples, and into the city proper yet again, where they apparently had just finished some performances, such as the lion dance. But although we missed the performances, we didn't really feel too let down, because there was so much to see here constantly, as we made our way through one section to the next, crossing over from the right side of the movie park to the left side. And yet again, I wasn't prepared for what I'd see here. So, I hope you enjoyed the view too. So this was definitely the most crowded section of the trip. But right after that, it was back to emptiness amidst all the fantastic set pieces, with bridges spanning across the streets below that looked straight out of a fairy tale. This is where I really began to wish that more of China looked like this, because you know, at one point in the past, a lot of it did. Although, I have no idea if these bridges that spanned from one building over to the other were actually something that existed in history. If they did, though, that's amazing. Anyways, we wandered around this area looking at everything for a little bit, before noticing some signs which highlighted some of the movies that had been shot here in the past. And maybe you'll recognize some of these if you've watched Chinese movies. So, looking out nearby across another lake, we were able to see even more fantastic architecture, before deciding we needed to find a place to cool off and sit down for a little bit.
We decided to get out of the sun for a bit. There are not many opportunities to do that here. There's a closed restaurant that we decided to go ahead and sit down inside. We went across to get some drinks, and now we're gonna rest for a moment before we continue going through this park. Alright, our short rest is over. I have my trusty umbrella here to protect me from getting any more burns, and we're gonna go to the palace now.
So we walked back into the main hallway, looking back towards that gate where we initially came in, and passed underneath this walkway on the side, looking at all the pillars as well as some posters that were placed on the walls.
So one thing we were unaware of for coming here is that there are apparently different shows that they have at different times of the day. So if you are someone who's going to come here in the future, make sure you can find out when these times are, even though you can't find it in English anywhere.
And so, we finally arrived at this place, the Tong Palace Gates, which I'd been most excited about going to since we first arrived here. And looking at the background behind me here, you might just notice that there's a stage where they happen to have those performances that I mentioned just a little bit ago on top of. And they clearly didn't mean for you to go up on the stage either. So we moved on from there through the gates and noticed a gigantic courtyard chamber where, although it was empty, we were able to still see a fantastic view of the gate above. And just beyond that, through the next set of gates, was the main palace complex, with even more exquisitely painted buildings. I couldn't wait to go on up these steps and see what was inside. So after heading on up, I noticed that, for the most part, a lot of this is closed off for viewing to the public at the moment. But that may change depending on when you're here. Although they did have one room where you could dress up as an emperor or empress and take some photos. Despite not being able to see very much of the insides of these buildings, however, everything was worth taking a shot of. So eventually, I decided what I wanted to do was move on from here and climb up the main gate, since we finally saw an access point.
Well, if you look down, there is someone who is not interested in climbing. It's quite a few steps, but I think it'll be worth it.
And it definitely was, because unlike most parts of China, for once, climbing on top of a gate was actually a way to get access to an even better view. Normally, looking at the building from down below is where you get the best view. But this movie park was so good that pretty much everywhere was great to take a video. Each nook and cranny made every climb worth it. Although there were a few times where I'd climb up a short flight of stairs only to be confronted by a door that was locked in front of me. And it wasn't only the doors, but also some areas like the very front of the main gate that were closed off to the public, which I learned is because that's where they have a lot of items for the performances stashed away. So looking down once again, I saw my father, and while he was down there, I decided to take in a little bit more of the view from up top, heading even further along the side so I could bring you this. Now, you can't tell me that that view isn't worth it. The only thing that I dislike seeing is everything that's outside of the movie park in the background, but hopefully that'll change sometime soon.
One thing I should mention, if you look over this way, they clearly have a lot of room still to build more if they plan to do that in the future. So hopefully this place will expand and become even more impressive over time.
So now that I'd had my fill of looking around this palace and the courtyard, I decided to head on down into the entrance area to find my father and move off to the next section. The Imperial Garden, all surrounded by this gigantic waterway, which reminded me a little bit of Yuan Gardens in Shanghai back at the very start of our trip. I know it may not look like it, but actually the majority of the plants that you see in the background here are fake, so not very much needs to be maintained. Although they do have to constantly keep up the paint jobs on all of these buildings. And while the garden looked absolutely beautiful, it really didn't quite compare to everything that we had just seen inside the palace. So we decided to head on out once again from the palace grounds and continue our way westward to continue seeing what else was here in the movie park.
This place is incredible, but nobody knows about it. I learned about this place first from my students when I had them do a project on trying to teach a foreign person about different places in China that they think are worth traveling to. And a lot of them talked about their hometowns, and a lot of my students are from Xiangyang. And this was one of the places that they mentioned.
I am really glad that I listened to my students about different places they recommended nearby that I should travel to during my summer vacation. Because if I hadn't, I would have never learned about this place. And that's probably why so few foreigners ever come here. Heck, it doesn't even seem to be very well known amongst Chinese tourists either, because there were so few of them here. And it really is a shame that there aren't more people coming here constantly, because there are so many different buildings absolutely worth seeing. Immaculate gardens, as well as a few corny little things that don't really make sense in the greater context of what's going on at the movie set. But for the most part, those things are few and far between. We were definitely getting a lot of exercise by walking from one place to the next as we traveled through the movie park, but probably one of my favorites was this next one that you're going to see here. A single gigantic covered building with even more bridges on the inside. And probably one of the reasons I liked this one so much too is because, yet again, they had this arched bridge crossing over from one side to the next. With the cave as the backdrop in the background, it really looked cool, but unfortunately, once we approached the cave, we saw that we were not allowed to go inside. So instead, we stayed here taking even more videos of this amazing building. Honestly, I probably could have just stayed in this one spot for an hour, just shooting a time-lapse video, but I knew that I needed to move on, so I headed on outside nearby, going out onto the walkway where another building was, standing out almost alone in the lake, and took in the view in front of me, looking back across the way where I had stood earlier, checking out that other bridged part of the movie set from afar. I was also able to see the palace yet again from this angle. And really, I can't say it enough, but pretty much every single place you go to has a view that's worth seeing. So there's almost no place you can go that you'll go wrong if you come here. And moving on from there, I eventually caught up with my father again, who had been sitting down trying to rest a little bit, before moving on yet again to our final spot inside the movie park. We had no idea what was going to await us on top of this hill, but that didn't deter us, because the movie park hadn't let us down yet. So once we finally reached the top and walked through this doorway here, that we weren't quite sure if we were supposed to be in because it was just one door set slightly ajar, we walked on in and took in the view, which was just as good as any other part of the movie park. I actually came up here a little bit faster than my father did, so I was able to see a lot more of this section than he did. But once my father did make it up here, however, we made our way up to the top corner of this building to see our final and best view yet.
Well, if anything, I'm happy that the last view that I see inside this park, out of all the unexplored areas so far, is the best one.
Whether it was looking down below at all the people walking on the bridges, crossing from one section to the next as we had done earlier, or spending time looking at each individual building, zoomed in up close, or doing a panorama of the movie park in general, there was a ton that we could see from this spot. And if you consider coming to the Xiangyang movie park, you absolutely have to come to this spot. Eventually though, it was time for us to head on out of this movie park, so we headed on down from here and looked for the exit.
Looks like we found the exit. Time to go out into Chinatown. I would think that the whole place would be Chinatown or China, but apparently there is a town in China called Chinatown.
Eventually, we found our way over to the exit, which led us outside into the Chinatown tourist area, and unfortunately, there really wasn't very much here except a couple shops, as most of the things here were closed or under construction. So, that's it for our time here at the Tong movie park in Xiangyang. I hope you enjoyed what you were able to see here in this video, and that you come back next time as we return to Wuhan for the final section of our trip. Until next time. Thank you again for watching this video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. Also, please share this channel with others so we can make the channel grow together as I continue to put out more videos.